Sweet, Difficult Sounds, Part 2. So we just left off where Ashley was mocking Cole in the cafeteria lunch line. Start off on paragraph 35. All the students within earshot started laughing and pointing in Cole's direction. Dropping his eyes, Cole plugged his dangling earbud into his ear and turned up the volume on his phone. He slid out of line and disappeared into the crowd. In that moment, Nathakula felt herself getting scorching hot, as mad as Auntie Thandi got when Patience asked for another nurse who speaks English. She had English class with Cole last period. Slitting her eyes at Ashley, she told herself she would speak to him then. When Nathakula got to English class, Cole was already seated. There were no seats beside him, so she sat at the back of the room by the window and half listened as students got up and rehearsed for the first round of the school-wide poetry recital. The winners of the school contest would get a chance to perform in the statewide competition. Nathakula loved poetry, but her thoughts drifted off to her old life with her mother and father, Ubude, Mofat, and all her friends back home, where she was a talkative, happy little bird who was always writing, speaking, and even teaching the other kids new words to say. Nathakula, it's your turn, Ms. Johnson said, interrupting her thoughts. Nathakula had chosen one of her favorite poems, Paul Laurence Dunbar's Sympathy, and she had it memorized. She replayed it in her mind. I know what the caged bird feels, alas, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, and the river flows like a stream of glass. When the first bird sings, and the first bud opes, and the faint perfume from its chalice steals, I know what the caged bird feels. Though she knew the lines, she had been praying that Ms. Johnson would never call on her. She didn't want her classmates to hear her say anything ever again. She never wanted to give them another opportunity to laugh at her accent. Sinking lower in her seat, she kept her mouth shut and shook her head. It's not optional, Nathakula, Ms. Johnson said, gesturing to the front of the room. Now everyone was looking at her, including Cole. Nathakula rose from her seat. Oh, sorry, I lost my place. Clenching her hands so tightly that her nails dug into her palms, she began to recite the poem. I know what the caged bird feels, alas, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes. A little louder, Ms. Johnson said, smiling at her. We want to hear you. Nathakula started over, but this time she tried to imitate the high-pitched, breathless pace of Ashley and her crew, saying the word bird in the same offhanded way they did with the word like. She pretended she hadn't a care in the world, but really, she was ready to hurl. Nathakula's stomach was doing backflips and cartwheels. I know why the caged bird beats his wing till its blood is red on the cruel bars. For he must fly back to his perch and cling when he fain would be. And then, in the middle of the poem, her mind suddenly went blank. She'd forgotten the next line. As she stood there fidgeting and fumbling, repeating the same lines over and over, the majority of the class stopped paying attention. They passed notes back and forth and watched the clock, waiting for Nathakula to shut up so class could be dismissed. When Nathakula confused the lines in the final verse, she decided to give up and spare herself any further embarrassment. Flopping down in her chair, she ducked her head, her cheeks burning. Cole began to clap. One girl laughed, then clapped her hand over her mouth. What was that? Someone said. The bell rang, and there was a rush as everyone headed to the door. Nathakula was the last to pack her books into her backpack. Ms. Johnson stopped her on the way to the door. Nathakula, she said, what happened? You've had weeks to memorize this poem. I thought for sure you'd know it by now. Nathakula's heart sank. She wanted to tell Ms. Johnson that she had memorized the poem, that she didn't know what had happened, or why her mind suddenly went blank. But she could feel tears coming to her eyes, so she choked out, I'm so sorry, Miss Johnson, and bolted out the door. That evening, Nathakula was at the kitchen table staring at a copy of the poem when Auntie Thandi got home from another double shift at the hospital. Nathakula fixed her a plate while she changed from her scrubs to sweats. Salabonani, her aunt said, stretching her back as she walked into the kitchen. Unjani. So let's look up these two words we just heard. Salabonani means hello, and Unjani means how are you? Fine, Nathakula answered, setting her aunt's plate on the table and slumping down in the chair. What's wrong with you? Nothing. Auntie Thandi raised her eyebrows and tilted her head. Nathakula? Nathakula told her about what had happened during English class and how she had to recite sympathy again the next day. Auntie Thandi cupped Nathakula's chin, gently raising her face so she could see Nathakula's eyes. Just be yourself, Inyoni. You can do this. No, Nathakula said. You don't understand. I can recite the poem in my head, but when I have to say it out loud, I forget the words. You can practice in front of me then, Auntie Thandi said, digging a spoon into the sadzda and gravy Nathakula had prepared. You don't understand, Nathakula said again. They all stare at me. They're so cold and unfeeling, as if I am invisible, as if I... Go on. As if they can't even see me. Auntie Thandi set down her spoon and leaned back. Her eyes lit up. She sprang out of her seat and dashed to a bookshelf in the corner. She started pulling out dozens of books, as many as she could find that had a picture of the author on the cover. Seems to me as if you need to practice fighting fire with fire. She started standing the books up around the room, on the sofa, chairs, table, everywhere. What do you mean? You said the other students act like you aren't really there. Maybe you need to start pretending that they, as an audience, aren't really there either. Maybe that'll help. I don't get it. Look at all these faces, Auntie Thandi said, gesturing to the book covers. All these eyes staring at you, except they're not really there. They're not really staring at you. Practice your poetry with this in mind. Keep reminding yourself as you speak, and soon it won't matter if they are really there or not. Auntie Thandi sat back down to her dinner, and Nathakula stood up. She began to recite the poem in front of her audience, Auntie Thandi and the books. It felt silly at first, and she giggled her way through the poem. But soon she was looking into the eyes of these book authors and repeating her poem from start to finish, again and again, without any slip-ups. You already know what to say, her aunt reminded her. Just let yourself be heard. Do whatever works for you. Nathakula ran through her poem several more times. By the time she finished, it didn't matter to her whether her audience was real or not. The next day in English class, Nathakula's palms were sweaty. She wiped her hands on her jeans and slumped deeper into her chair. Maybe Miss Johnson will forget about me, she thought. But sure enough, with 15 minutes left on the clock, Miss Johnson quieted the class and called her up to the front. The whole room fell silent as Nathakula got up and shuffled slowly up to the chalkboard. She felt her heart thumping out of her chest and did her best to ignore it. She just had to get this dreadful assignment over with. She stared out at her classmates and scanned their bored and amused expressions, searching in vain for a friendly face. They are not real, she told herself as she began reciting the poem. The lines sounded painful and strained, so Nathakula started to speed up. She could see smirks on her classmates' faces and knew they were remembering her terrible performance the day before. Sweat sprang out along her hairline, and she fought the sinking feeling and continued. I know why the caged bird sings, ah me, when his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and he would be free. She paused. She couldn't recall the following line, and each second she remained silent felt like an hour. She was ready to hide under a rock. Her tongue was a block of stone. Why did I trust Auntie's ridiculous idea? Nathakula asked herself. Book covers don't whisper and laugh at you. The sound of the students giggling grew louder, and Nathakula became more flustered. The only one showing any interest was Cole. Then she remembered something else that Auntie Thandi had said. Do whatever works for you. She continued to recite, becoming more and more composed the more she focused on Cole. She never missed another beat, and her classmates stopped laughing as her voice rose, coming to an end with the booming lines. It is not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven he flings. I know why the caged bird sings. For a moment, the whole room was silent. Then Nathakula's mouth dropped open as Ashley began to clap. The other students joined her, and Cole called out, "Bravo!" Then the final bell rang, and the entire class gathered their things and rushed out of the room. Still buzzing with pride, Nathakula went to collect her things. When she was the only person left in the classroom, Ms. Johnson said, "Good job, Nathakula. You have a good chance of making it to the regional competition." Nathakula was stunned. "Really?" she said. "You think so?" Blushing, Nathakula made a note to give Auntie Thandi a big hug when she got home that night. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson." As she wandered out of the classroom, Nathakula saw that Cole was waiting for her. For a while, they wandered down the hallway together, neither saying a word. Then finally, Cole said, "You were great." "No way." Nathakula blushed again, turning to face him. "I can't stand the way I sound." Cole shook his head. "You have a pretty voice." He looked down at his shoes, then slowly met Nathakula's eyes. "Kulkubana." Cole pronounced the words delicately, unsure if he said them right. Nathakula's heart warmed. His accent was horrible, but his effort was all she needed. "Pleased to meet you too." That night, Nathakula told Auntie Thandi all about how she had conquered the poem. "I knew it," her aunt crowed. "I demand my own performance, Inyani." Standing tall in her kitchen, Nathakula proceeded to recite the poem, proudly and imperfectly, entirely in her own voice. Also, what Cole had said to her means "pleased to meet you" in Ndible.